Hi, I'm Micah Clark. Thank you for joining us today. I have a good friend in studio with us, stopping by the office. I've known this person for a long time. You will recognize him, but I also realize many people do not know Congressman Jim Banks from the Fort Wayne area, who watch us maybe Southern Indiana, but you soon will. He's running for U.S. Senate. But Jim and I have been friends for many years. It's always good to see him get caught up. Jim, for those who maybe don't know a lot about your background, certainly know your name now that you're a national figure. Tell us a little bit about your start in politics, because I knew you before then.
We've known each other for a long time. And I get the Friday podcast emails, and I think I gave you a heck recently. I'm like, what? You invite all these people to come sit down with you for the podcast? You've never invited me. So now I feel like I've arrived.
That's right.
Now that you've had me come. And first and foremost, Micah, Amanda and I appreciate everything that you do, everything that you've done for our state, for the pro-family cause in Indiana. We have a lot to be proud of in our state, and I'm excited about the future with a new governor and new leaders in our state that will fight for families. And AFA of Indiana has always been at the forefront of that important cause. I served in the state legislature.
Yeah, we worked closely on a lot of things.
For 6 years, and we got a lot done during that period. But really, it's been even since then that we've seen a lot of great victories. I come from a small town, Indiana, your quintessential small town in Indiana outside of Fort Wayne called Columbia City. It's a town of less than 10,000 people. I was born and raised there. My dad was a hardworking union factory worker. He made axles at a factory called Dana in Fort Wayne. And my earliest memories are of him being in the early 80s, being laid off or being on the picket line. And I mean, if that tells you a little bit about where I came from. When I was born, we lived in a trailer park, and really we came from very little. My mom and dad had an American dream that there are 3 boys, I have 2 younger brothers, that we could grow up in this great country and do more than what my mom and dad were able to do. And I've lived that American dream, and my parents are very proud of me. My mom was a cook at the Miller's Mary Manor nursing home in Northeast Indiana and Columbia City for most of her working life. And I look back at my background, and I'm astonished at coming from that to what I get to do today. This is a great country, and I'm very proud to serve my country in a big way. I went from Columbia City to Bloomington, Indiana. I got thrown into the lion's den of left-wing politics at Indiana University. I got involved in college Republicans. I interned for a guy that you know very well named John Hosteller, who's the congressman of that district, as far to the right as Bloomington was to the left. And I learned a lot about politics and the bloody 8th district, worked on his campaigns, and graduated. Amanda and I went to, I'm summing all this up quickly because you've asked me to tell my story, but I chased my wife, Amanda, to Colorado Springs.
Right. That's where I first met her.
She went to work for an organization called Focus on the Family, and worked for Dr. Dobson when Dr. Dobson was still at the helm, and worked for him in the public policy department. I landed there a year later after working on campaigns in Indiana, and had the privilege of working at Focus on the Family too, where we really working with the pro-family network all over the country with people like you and Ryan McCann with Indiana Family Institute in Indiana, and got to be a part of that movement. Moved back to Indiana with some life circumstances. Amanda and I felt like we were newlyweds. We loved Colorado Springs, but we wanted to raise our own family in the state that we came from, near our families. And I tell people it's one of the few marital disagreements that I won. We ended up in my hometown instead of her hometown, which is Indianapolis, and immediately got involved in local politics. And I love local politics. I became the Republican chairman of Whitley County. I got elected to the county council. My childhood dermatologist, who I got to know really well, was a state senator at the time named Gary Dillon.
Oh, sure.
I got to know him really well as a teenager, going to see the dermatologist often. And when I was county chairman and new county councilman, he came to me and said, "I'm not running for re-election of the state senate. I think you're young." And I was 30 years old at the time and ran for the state senate, won a tough primary, and had the opportunity to serve my state and my district at the state house. And then That was 2000. So everything since 2000 has been a blur. I served in the State House, Governor Mitch Daniels, Governor Pence. A lot happened during that time. I served in the Navy Reserves and during that period of time, and got deployed to Afghanistan. And some people know that my wife was elected to take my place while I was deployed, and a lot of people liked her more than me. In fact, I'm told all the time, I hear that your wife is more conservative than you, and I want to say on what, but she had a very conservative track record at the State House, and very proud of her.
She took a strong stand on religious freedom. I remember she cast that vote, one of only a handful not to water down the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which took a lot of courage.
You know, I don't tell this story often, but when I was deployed in Afghanistan, there was a chance that my congressional district was going to open up, which it did. Marlon Stutzman, who's going to take my place, a great conservative, ran for the U.S. Senate, opened up the House seat, and I came home and ran for it. But there was a period of time when that was uncertain, and I remember I was in Afghanistan, Amanda was at the State House, the RFRA debate was happening, and I remember my wife Amanda feeling so strongly that the legislature was after passing a strong religious liberty law in RFRA, backtracked on it a week later and not just watered it down, but passed something that was worse than what we had before in protecting religious liberty in our state. Really, a lot of people who we know and respect that succumbed to we didn't call it wokeness back then, but sort of the woke movement in the state. And I remember talking to Amanda. I was in Afghanistan. She was at the State House. And she felt so strongly about it, but she thought that it would harm my political career by her showing courage and doing the right thing and voting. One of 5 Republicans have voted against the so-called RFRA fix. And I couldn't have been prouder for her for doing that. I mean, and she was worried about it, I think, on a lot of levels of what her vote would do. But at the end of the day, she showed courage and resolve and did the right thing in voting to protect our religious liberties. So she's a great woman of faith, but also a great, I think, person of courage. And I came back from Afghanistan. The seat opened. I ran for it. Really, it was the toughest race I've ever had. I think there were 6 Republicans running, and 4 of them were self-funders. I'm not a self-funder. I wish I was, but I'm not. And narrowly won that primary, got elected at the same time that Donald Trump became president, and have been in Washington for 4 years. I've seen the difference. I know you love history, so you can test me on this, but I don't know that in history we've ever seen the whiplash between a great, strong American president and perhaps the weakest president we've ever had in American history. From America projecting strength around the world to America being weakened by a president who's done so much damage, not just to this country, but our stature abroad. So I got to see the night and day difference between the Trump policies and the radical socialist policies of the left. And as we move into this election cycle, there's so much at stake.
Well, and I mean, we could spend hours talking about all the things that Joe Biden has done and filtering down through the bureaucracy. Something I wanted to ask you about, because you made a little bit of news about this, and I don't know how many people know about this, and I don't think it's the first time this has happened, but a military base in North Carolina, it's Fort Liberty, was doing a training session, and the slide on terrorism or anti-terrorism, and the slides got leaked out, and come to find out they listed National Right to Life, extremely respected pro-life organization, as a terrorist group. Yeah. And so you saw that. Tell us about what, and I don't think that's the first time we've seen things like that, but what do you think of that? I know you're taking some action on that.
Yeah, we've come so far from a military that is dedicated to training to fight and win wars. And really, at the end of the day, I mean, I served in Afghanistan, like I said. I mean, a strong military is the biggest deterrent that we have to deter our adversaries and enemies from attacking America or attacking our allies. And you felt it the moment Joe Biden became the commander-in-chief. The woke agenda of this administration of the radical left turned the American military into politicized the American military in a way that projects weakness around the world. So we've seen so much evidence of that from drag shows on military bases, which is absurd. I mean, the Chinese watching what's going on in America, and they see the emphasis on drag shows and the military paying for transgender surgeries or abortions. This is not the military that Donald Trump was commander-in-chief of. This is a politicized military unlike anything we've ever seen. So then you see slideshows come out of Fort Liberty, by the way, used to be Fort Bragg, for those who are paying attention.
I wondered about that,
They changed the name, and naming National Right to Life as a, quote, terrorist organization. If you go back to the moment Biden became president, the first thing they did in the military was something called a military stand down to train all of our troops on right-wing terrorism and what's the word I'm looking for, but domestic terrorism, and that was the emphasis for the first several months of the Biden administration, was on that instead of on how do we pull out of Afghanistan in a safe and responsible way? How do we train our military up to fight the Chinese if God forbid we ever get into a war with the Chinese? How do we prepare for that? How do we train for that? They were focused on something that was very much a political issue that the facts have shown that didn't bear out. There was something that made us stronger, or that was warranted. So naming National Right to Life as a domestic terrorist organization shows you everything it's become of. I mean, it was to me it was symbolic of what the woke causes within our military. So I wrote a letter. I serve on the Armed Services Committee. I'm a leader on the committee. I chair the Military Personnel Subcommittee, and it's the committee that has jurisdiction over all of our troops' quality of life, their pay, their benefits, recruitment, retention, and we have a lot of issues in all that regard. And I think a lot of it goes back to, we have a historic recruitment crisis.
I was just going to mention that.
A lot of that goes back to sons and daughters of veterans asking the question of,
should I go in again?
Should I get into the military when it's become so political? And the Secretary of the Army responded and said, we weren't aware of this slide until a week ago. I think she said, Secretary said it's a slide that's been included for a handful of years. It doesn't represent the views of the Army, so they eliminated the slide. No one was ever held accountable for it, because no one's ever held accountable.
But it was there for a year, and they couldn't recognize on their own that this is a bad idea.
That's right. Until it leaked out. Exactly. And Republican congressmen like myself and others took notice of it, and then decided to crack down on it. So
have they backtracked at all, or are they just covering their tracks, or have they taken any substantive action?
No, there's never accountability.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never seen anyone in the Biden administration held accountable for anything. And go back to the Afghanistan withdrawal.
Right.
You know, I served in Afghanistan. I've been to the Bagram Air Base, which was a giant airstrip. They closed down Bagram first, pulled the rug out from under what was going on there, and then they pushed the pullout to a well-populated base and public airport in Kabul, which is where the Abbey Gate was was the gate going into the airport, and then you had 13 of our heroes that were killed because of the foolish, irresponsible decisions of the generals, the Pentagon leadership, the State Department, and Joe Biden himself. By the way, Kamala Harris said, quote, she was the last person in the room when President Biden made the decision to pull out of Afghanistan. She bragged about it at the time. No one has ever been held accountable for that, so it shouldn't surprise you that no one would ever be held accountable for calling a very prominent pro-life group. And really what that's saying is that not that National Right to Life is a domestic terrorist organization. That's saying that you and I are domestic terrorists because we believe in the right to life.
Yeah. I heard someone the other day, this whole question about what is Joe Biden's cognitive ability, how's he going to be president the next 5 months, what connection does Kamala Harris have? She's trying to back away from him. He's trying to hang on to her, and we're like one. But I heard someone who was on the inside say what they think has happened, because they think that President Biden's been in decline for a long time, is that really the agency heads are running Washington. It's not coming so much out of Joe Biden's office. It's Mayorkas is doing his thing with no accountability above him. They're all like their little kingdoms, and they're pushing this wokeness everywhere.
Right. I mean, don't let Kamala Harris out there.
No.
I mean, she's covered up for Joe Biden's cognitive decline, for really the lack of. I mean, it's the weekend at Bernie's White House. I mean, they've propped him up, and I've said all along. For 4 years, people have asked me. Obviously, Joe Biden's not in charge. Who's in charge? And there are probably a lot of answers to that, but no one covered up for him more than Kamala Harris did. And I mean,
I can't get into the details, but I know a story about where she came into a meeting and the people they were expecting the president, and she said, "I'll meet with you," and that kind of says it all. And that was not recent. So, Biden was not in the greatest shape when he ran 4 years ago, but they had a low insurrection, got rid of him. I don't hear him use that word anymore, though.
No.
But anyway, I want to move on.
The irony.
Yeah, it is. I want to move on because when you first ran, you told me you wanted to be a pro-family congressman. You've done a phenomenal job at that. But I noticed you've a couple things. You introduced a bill on adoption rights, and we've heard about this. I've heard about this at the local level. Certainly in other states, I know it's far worse. But even in Indiana, there are religious adoption agencies, Catholics and others, who are concerned about being forced to place kids in homosexual households, or worse, trying to place kids in a faith-based home through a faith-based adoption agency, and the state working against them to do that, or the feds. And there seems to be a punishment of people for their faith when they want to adopt or foster kids. And so you've got a bill on that. Tell us about that. What it's called?
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen happen in the Biden Harris administration is cracking down on faith-based adoption agencies that make these decisions about the well-being of these kids in the homes that they're placed in, and make a concerted decision based on principles of faith. So we've explored legislation to stop funding these agencies that would prevent kids from being placed in homes that don't buy into the gender
trans craziness,
trans craziness, and it's concerning, and it is an issue in Indiana. And I hope we're going to have a new governor in January, and I think it's going to be Mike Braun, the senator who I hope to replace in the U.S. Senate. And I know it will be a priority of his to, at a state level, make sure that Indiana is a state that applies common sense. But at the federal level, we have to defund these agencies that are pushing the radical trans agenda on adoption agencies, and that's what my SAFE Act would do. Well,
AFA doesn't endorse candidates. We are obviously conservative, but I have to say, I've looked at Tim Walz's record on this. It's unbelievable what that guy has done as governor to parents of faith. I mean, he's created a state that he calls a trans refuge or trans sanctuary state, where kids can go and receive puberty-blocking drugs, these surgeries, and their parents are not notified.
Yeah, this is crazy.
It's
and I hope more people become aware of that as we head into the election, and of how truly radical some of these policies are in blue states like Minnesota.
I really think parental rights are on the ballot this fall as one of the issues, and I hope people realize that. 2 years ago, with Governor Youngkin, and that was a huge issue. It's not gone away. But the economy and other things are more important to people. But this is a pivotal election, top down. So the other issue and there's so many, I get news releases from you all the time. You're doing a lot of great work. Tell us about the Anti-Woke Caucus. And I know in this same issue of trans surgeries for kids, but first tell me about this Anti-Woke Caucus. Many people don't know there are all sorts of caucuses or groups of legislators. You've got the Black Caucus, Hispanic Caucus, and socialist caucuses. I can't remember what that one's called. But tell me about the caucus you formed.
Well, before I get to that, I chaired the largest conservative caucus, something called the Republican
Right.
Study Committee, and it has a one-term term limit. So I finished that last Congress, and as I was heading into this Congress, looking at ways that I can contribute, make a difference, and someone who I respected said exactly what you said. There's a caucus for everything. Why isn't there an anti-woke caucus? And I kind of like the idea of it. So I gathered a few dozen of my colleagues who believe that, like I do, that wokeism is a cancer that we eat our country inside out if we let it. And the radical woke agenda of the Biden-Harris administration means that every federal department now has a chief diversity officer, or you've seen racial quotas in some of the departments of the military as they recruit people to come into our. Again, why do we have a recruitment crisis? It's because of issues like these. And what people ask all the time, what is wokeness? I mean, to me, wokeness is it's an anti-American agenda and ideology that we have to combat, and unfortunately, it's being pushed by the government. I mean, there's no. I don't think there's a bigger source for seems like just overnight a lot of this stuff has happened. Some of it's been there. It's ideological, but it's come out of the Biden administration pushing it, using the power of the federal government to create new mandates and to use unelected bureaucrats and all these agencies to push a woke agenda on the rest of us. So, you look at the radical trans movement and what that's doing to families and kids, what kids are being exposed to in schools. No one is immune to this. I mean, you see it at prominent private schools, you see it in public schools, you see it in big cities, you see it in small towns. I hear complaints from Hoosier parents all over the state who never thought that this stuff would come to their rural school district.
Lafayette. It's places like Tipton, little small towns.
So why is that? It's being pushed by bureaucrats in Washington who strings attached to federal funding means that you have to teach this or that. And I also think that the left has figured out that, and Christopher Rufo, a great book he wrote last year, I think he touches upon this, the radicals on the left have understood for far too long that they can indoctrinate our kids by getting left-wing teachers at the K through 12 level. College campuses have always been chocked full of radicals who teach our kids on college campuses. But if they deeply embed radicals in federal agencies in Washington, D.C. or at the state level that are going to outlast one governor to the next, then they can push this movement and this agenda. So the Anti-Woke Caucus is dedicated to how can we, I mean, sometimes it feels like whack-a-mole. But how can we combat it? Where can we defund it? How can we develop, and we've done this, how can we develop an agenda for when we get a pro-America, anti-woke president like Donald Trump back in the White House to back up a new administration to combat it? Right now we're playing defense because of the administration that we have in charge, but hopefully come January we'll be able to play offense again and eradicate wokeness from our federal government.
I'd like to see, and you don't have to comment on this because some people say this is a radical idea. It was Ronald Reagan's idea, though, get rid of the Department of Education. If not that, I'd like to see all the money we spend block granted back to the states without strings, so states can do and be the engineers of ingenuity in education. Rather than, because I was told, and this may or may not be accurate, but I think it's true by a legislator, Indiana gets about 7% of its education funding from the feds, but it comes with all these strings and it dominates what schools can and can't do. And it's a local issue. It should have never been a federal issue to start with. It didn't improve education when Jimmy Carter created that, or maybe it was Nixon, but when that department was created, it didn't make schools better. It made them more bureaucratic.
I've never believed this more than now because my kids are, I have three daughters, so pray for me. A freshman, a 7th grader, and a 6th grader in public schools. And I've never believed this more than I do now, that we should completely eliminate the federal Department of Education, at least block grant those funds back to states and let states control their own destiny. And that I think that's more true than ever. I serve on the House Education Committee in the Congress. I served on the Education Committee in the State Senate. And said I would never do that again.
Yeah.
It's a tough job. But when I got to Washington with young kids, I felt like I had a duty.
They speak a whole different language on those on the education committees.
Oh yeah,
it's crazy.
But you've had Republican presidents and Democrat presidents create the mess that we're in. You had No Child Left Behind under Bush. You had Race to the Top under Obama. And as you give more those big federal bills that Republicans and Democrats pass, you give more power to the federal Department of Education. I'm always reminded that in our United States Constitution, education is never mentioned.
Right.
If you read deeply the Indiana State Constitution, education is mentioned. There's several chapters and paragraphs about educating our kids. It's the role of the state, not the federal government. We need to do more to get the federal government out of the business of education and give that control back to states and local school districts and teachers and administrators and, most importantly, parents.
Well, Jim, I know you're on a tight schedule. You're all over the state doing things, and in D.C. too. Is there anything you want to close with? Otherwise, I'll just thank you for being. Is there anything else that's big on your heart that I know you're putting out fires all the time?
We just appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
What AFA of Indiana does is important. It's powerful. The grassroots army is real.
Yeah.
I read the weekly emails, and that keeps me educated. So anyone that's watching this that doesn't get Micah Clark's emails, subscribe to them because they're substantive. Oftentimes, I'm calling my state rep, who's a great guy, Chris Judy, and my state senator, and telling them, hey, I read this in Micah Clark's email, and I hope you do the right thing.
That's great.
But there's so much in Indiana to be proud of. I tell people, we were the first state to pass a pro-life law after the Dobbs decision.
We've protected girls' sports. Trans surgeries for minors.
And a lot of times, Micah, I've recognized in the past 5 or 6 years, it's the legislature leading on these issues. So Joanna King and Michelle Davis and Chris Judy and Matt Hostetler. I mean, these conservatives all around the state in the state house. Tyler Johnson, his first year as a state senator. They tell you when you get elected to any job that
don't pick a big bill.
Sit back and learn and don't rock the boat. And a guy like Senator Tyler Johnson gets in and immediately makes a difference on the causes that we care about. And that's why I think the state legislature matters. And we need to pay more attention to what goes on there and support the good people and get the bad ones out of office. And Indiana will do even more and better, I think, with the conservative governor that we're going to have in January. There's a lot to look forward to, and AFA of Indiana is going to be on the front lines.
Well, I want to have Tyler Johnson on someday. When he first was elected, I thought, man, you're taking Dennis Cruz's shoes, one of the legendary senators, pro-family Christian men down there, and Tyler's done a phenomenal job. So,
yes.
And again, it is the state level, but it's so good to see you again. Appreciate you coming by. Best of luck, and thank you for all you're doing.
Hopefully I get to do it again.
Yes, I'd love to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So.
Great.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that today. I give you kind of an update on what Jim's been doing in D.C. and locally, where his heart is, some of his background for those of you who don't know. You'll hear more about him coming up to this election. He's running for U.S. Senate, but we hope to have him on again as issues come up. But thank you for watching us today. Hope you have a great weekend. I'm Micah Clark with the American Family Association of Indiana.